Welcome to Linguistically Aware, the podcast about all things linguistics. You are listening to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting out of Calgary, Alberta, at the University of Calgary campus radio station, located on Treaty 7 land. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. My name is Brooklyn Shepard, and I'm a PhD student in linguistics at the University of Calgary. In this conversation-based podcast, I sit down with linguists, or language experts, to talk about the ways language and linguistics interacts with our daily lives. In this episode, our host is Jesse Weir, another PhD student here at U of C, studying syntax. Jesse sits down with Dr. Anja Arnhold, an associate professor of linguistics at the University of Alberta. Dr. Arnhold came to the University of Calgary to give a talk on the interaction of prosody, which refers to the melodic properties of speech, and syntax, which refers to the actual structure of the sentence. In this interview, Jesse asks her how she got started in linguistics and to explain how the melody of our speech interacts with the way we choose to structure our sentences, and how this interaction is shaped differently by different languages.
Thanks for having me. My name is Anja Arnhold, and I'm a linguist. In particular, I'm an associate professor of linguistics at the University of Alberta. I have a pretty standard academic progression, so I did my undergraduate degree in Potsdam, and I studied linguistics and German literature. And then I did a PhD, also in Germany, starting in Potsdam, ending up in Frankfurt. And then I did 2 postdocs, one here in Canada, and one back in Constance. And since then, I have worked here since 2016 in Alberta.
Okay. And so how did you first discover linguistics then? What drew you to the field?
That is actually a nice story. So when I was looking, I was fairly decided after high school that I wanted to study something, and I was looking at various different subjects, and I went to one of those open house things, and there were 2 professors giving a presentation about linguistics. They were Caroline Ferry, who ended up being my PhD supervisor and who I'm still in contact with, and she's awesome. And the other person was Gisbert Fanzolo, a great syntactician who unfortunately died a little while ago, way too young. And they just gave this great presentation about linguistics with syntactic trees and some prosodic contours, I think. And I just looked at this and thought, that's something I've never seen before. If I do this, I'm going to learn lots of new things. And then the 2 of them were kind of bickering in this nice way that showed that they were friends. And I thought, these people are total nerds. This looks like my people. And this looks like my thing.
That's wonderful to hear. Going into that, you got into it kind of late then, around undergrad time. Is there anything you wish you knew about linguistics before you got into it, though?
Honestly,
probably so much? Or?
No. I don't think it would have changed anything if I hadn't known before. Certainly I didn't really know what it was before, but I think everything that I've discovered, I've enjoyed. I don't think it would have changed anything. I certainly, there's nothing that would have warned me away, or nothing where I'm like, I wish I had known this, I would have done things differently. No, I've enjoyed learning more and more, and I hope to enjoy to learn more still.
That's fantastic. So, going to your research then, where you've ended up now, could you, you just gave a wonderful talk here at the university talking about the interaction between prosody and syntax. So could you explain a little bit about what prosody is for our listeners, and also what interaction it might have with syntax?
Yeah. So prosody is kind of the melodic and rhythmic aspects of speech. And I think I'm going to start with an example of something that prosody does. So quite often it marks what is important about a sentence or what's new about a sentence. So if I have an English sentence like I love cake, if I say that sentence as an answer to what you like or what you love, I might say I love cake. Whereas if you ask who loves cake, I might say I love cake. So there you've kind of changed, or I've changed how, like, which words are louder, which words are longer, and which words have a lot of pitch movement, like the voice goes up and down on them. And that's something that we very commonly do with prosody. But that's not actually the only way of expressing the same thing in English. And certainly not in other languages. But even in English, you could say something like, it's me who likes cake. And there you have changed the structure of the sentence, so the syntax, to also mark that it's me. Like, that's the new part of the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I want to look at in my research, and what I am looking at in my research, is how do the two of them go together when you basically have two different tools in your toolbox to do the same thing. How do they work together? Is one of them maybe more important in certain languages than in others? For example, we know that other languages are a lot more flexible with their syntactic structure than in English. Like, you can switch around word order a lot. You could say something like, likes cake me, in some languages, which in English doesn't work, but the equivalent in other languages might be perfectly fine. And that might do the same job of highlighting what's important.
Yeah, and going back to your example that you gave there with changing the syntax to like something like it's me who likes cake, you can definitely tell there's a bit of that interplay where you're still emphasizing the me, even though you are changing the word order in the syntax to signal something, but you're still doing a little bit of that prosodic work. So I can definitely see how that interplay comes in.
Yeah,
so
that's actually, when I started out, I thought, maybe you don't need to do this same thing with the prosody when the syntax is already marking what's important, but it seems that at least for English, you need that at least as much. Like, it really isn't the same syntactic construction if the prosody doesn't play along.
As somebody who works in linguistics as well, I definitely understand this like appeal to wanting to say that we're just going to signal a change in something with one aspect of it, like just changing the word order and not having any prosodic interplay with that at all. But like your research might seem to suggest that like we do some of these redundant things, like maybe there is a little bit more linked between the two mediums as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think there's two things there. So one thing that to me is the slightly more interesting thing maybe is that I think it's English specifically that just uses prosody a lot. And I think in English, prosody is the thing that you need to mark these kinds of things, like what's the new, what's the important thing. And I think in English, that is the thing you do, and so you always do it, even when you have this specific syntactic construction already. And maybe that's not the case for all languages. Maybe it is, though. The other thing, though, is I agree that it's a nice thought that language would be efficient and would avoid redundancy. I don't think it always does that, right? So especially if we talk in a noisy channel, which we do a lot of the time. So like there might be a lot of background noise going on sometimes, then we definitely need to do more than one thing. So in a way, if you think about it, if you want communication to be efficient, that doesn't necessarily mean that you only do as much as you need. It might actually be more efficient if you have more cues towards the same thing, because then you can be sure that your message gets across. And the other thing is that prosody does a lot of things at the same time, right? So all of these things that are marking what's important, what's not important, are also involved in things like, signaling your attitudes and your emotions and your identity. So maybe because all of these cues do so many things, it's good to have more cues at the same time. But I think that's something where we are seeing more research and where we should have more research to really work out the precise details of what happens when we look at more than one factor that we're actually communicating at the same time. Right.
So you've talked about how English handles prosody and syntax. What are some of the other languages that you've worked on or are currently working on, and how might they have the interaction between prosody and syntax?
So the one, because I think this is where it gets interesting, right? When you look at different languages, because they don't all do the same things, and they don't all have the same exact toolboxes to express the same things. And that's probably one of my favorite things about linguistics. So far I have looked at Finnish a lot, which has much more flexible word order than English. So this thing that I said where you could say, cake I like. That would be a good sentence in English. Or not only I like cake, but like me cake or something like that. Like those kinds of variations in word order, that's something that Finnish does and that you can use to mark what's important or what's something that I expect you to already know. And there I did find that when speakers were doing those kinds of adjustments of word order, in contrast to just reading a sentence that I had given them, then they were using prosody a little bit less than when they were reading sentences that had just the normal standard word order and normal standard sentence structure. Mm-hmm. So that would speak for those trade-offs. The other language that I have systematically looked at for this so far is Mandarin. That is different from English in that it has these lexical tones. So whether you say something as ma or ma, that means literally different things. And then the sad thing is that I always forget which one means which. So there's 4 lexical tones, and the ma syllable with the 4 different tones means either mother, horse, to scold, and I forget. Sorry. But the thing is, those literally change the actual meaning of the words, and so you kind of have to have those things there. You can't just do the same thing that you do in English, where you just put some pitch movement on one of the words and keep the other words flat, because that would mess with the tones that are part of distinguishing. Are you saying mother or horse? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, Mandarin is quite different from English, but it's also similar in that you can do similar things to mark what's important. You are expanding these lexical tonal contours that you have when the word is the new one, and when another word in the same sentence is new or important, then you're compressing those. Kind of in similar ways that in English also we just make words more or less prominent. And like English, it seems that prosody is the thing. Even when you have the equivalent of an English sentence like it's cake that I like, in Mandarin too, you are doing the whole prosodic shebang, at least as much or even more so as you do in a completely normal I like cake sentence.
Okay, so but Mandarin doesn't quite do a lot of the things that Finnish does then.
No. So this change in word order, I think it's a little bit more flexible, but this is the part where, that's why there's a PhD student involved who knows more about Mandarin than I do.
Okay, so just based on what you've told me, then it feels like, English sits on one end of the spectrum with like a very rigid word order, but we use prosody to compensate for that. Whereas Finnish, where you have like the flexibility, you rely a lot less on like your prosody to distinguish these things. But Mandarin kind of falls somewhere in between then.
Yeah, that's my idea. And also you have these tones thrown in, the lexical tones in Mandarin that neither of the other 2 languages have. Yeah.
It's very fascinating.
I think it is.
Yeah. So at this point, you mentioned like you have a PhD student involved to look at Mandarin. Like what other sort of evidence have you collected to kind of back all of this up?
Part of it is in the literature, right? Like we know, for example, there's quite a lot of studies about English prosody that describe what are the possible pitch patterns and what do they mean-ish. There's some disagreement, but the general picture is fairly clear. And on the other hand, there is a lot of literature about how Finnish word order works together with expressing these kinds of pragmatic things like contrasting things or highlighting new information. So that's there. What I have done is kind of, on the Finnish side, I have worked a lot more on how the prosody works just as such. And basically it seems to be very regular. A lot of it is marking out very clearly what the words are, and it's a lot less flexible than English prosody. So what I did for that, for my PhD, I did a couple of studies where I asked people to basically read sentences in standard word order. So just like very unmarked, very straightforward, simple sentences. And then I asked them to say these sentences as answers to different questions that systematically varied which words would be the new ones or the important ones. And then I looked at what happened. And what happened is that they did make these words more prominent or less prominent according to what the question was. But unlike in English, they really didn't do something where they would either realize a word with completely flat pitch, like you often do in English when you have a word that's not so important. It's often quite flat. And also, you didn't see this kind of variation in the timing of pitch movements that English has. So in English, you have these contrastive things like I like cake versus I like cake, where you have a different shape of the pitch movement. And these shapes express different things that are often somewhat subtle, but quite systematically you have these mappings between the form and the meaning with a lot of different variations. And in Finnish, it's a lot simpler. You have a lot of just very regular pitch movements that mostly say, here is a unit. And then you can change the size of the units, like you can have 2 or 3 words sharing a certain pitch movement, but you can't completely change what the pitch movement is, if that's not too technical.
No, I feel like maybe that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for kind of unpacking that a little bit more.
You're listening to Linguistically Aware, broadcasting on CJSW 90.9 FM on Treaty 7 Land. Listen to this episode or any other episode of Linguistically Aware in full at cjsw.com or Apple Podcasts. Just search Linguistically Aware. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics at the University of Calgary, be sure to visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca.
So with collecting these recordings then, like you're doing this experimentally, like what goes into the setup of a study like that then?
Mm-hmm. So you begin by thinking what's the question and then what are the different conditions that we systematically want to get. So for example, in this case, I want to have the same sentence as answers to different questions. And then the sentences themselves also have to be constructed in such a way that we can actually measure things. So for example, you can measure pitch really well on vowels like I and A and U, and also on certain consonants like H and M and N. Those are really nice for measuring fundamental frequency, which is the thing that we perceive as pitch. But something like T or K cannot be measured.
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of that same information in it.
Yes, and so you don't want to have a sentence that has lots of these very hard consonants in there, because then you get absolutely no measurements for pitch. So there, a lot of the times, that's why you get these sentences that work well in a context, but out of the blue might seem a little bit odd, because we want to have something where we can both measure the pitch and where we can segment the different parts of the sentence. Like you can also identify quite well where an M begins or where an M ends, but something like Y next to a vowel is very hard to tease apart.
Right. So you kind of have to work with this trade-off of, controlling the way things are being said so you get exactly what you want, as opposed to having spontaneous speech where you might not be getting anything that you are interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they are really different methods that can complement each other quite well, but especially if you're trying to test particular hypotheses, you want to know not only, if this appears and that appears, how does it look, but you want to know which one of 2 factors is the one that makes this effect appear, so you need to vary both of them systematically. And that's often very hard to do in a spontaneous speech corpus. Not impossible, but yeah.
You're kind of fishing for these golden examples that, especially with uncommon things, like earlier today you had talked about examples like English passive sentences, which are certainly permissible in the language, but they're very uncommonly used. So trying to find examples related to that in spontaneous speech is difficult, but it's completely fine to provide a speaker with that and have them say it. Like, no one's going to get tripped up by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing is that in a corpus, you don't really know what the speaker had in their mind. So that's why when I give people a sentence, I give them the question that they're supposed to answer with this sentence, because then I know what the context is, right? Mm-hmm. And I know what question this answers. Whereas we're having a conversation, sometimes you're asking me explicit questions, and then we know what I'm answering, hopefully. But sometimes I'm also just speaking for some time, and then I might be answering implicit questions that are in my head, but you don't necessarily know what they are. And as a researcher, I can make a guess. Like, I think this is answering that question. But then you're kind of wondering what's the chicken and the egg, right? Like, does this sound like it's answering that question? Or is it, and that's why I think that's the question? Or, is that how you answer that question and that's why?
Thank you. That's a very fascinating insight. So going back to like the broad purpose of your research, if you will, like what do you hope will be the outcome out of this? And like, what is the end goal at this point, I suppose? I know that's a tough question to ask because as researchers, like questions will only beget more questions. But for the short term, what do you hope to gain out of this project?
Concretely, I think that this will show us... I didn't say anything about Kalaallisut yet, which is kind of a pity. So that's going to be the third language. So that's the language of Inuit in Greenland. And that is a language that works a lot like Finnish, but it's even more complicated. So you have flexible word order. You have a lot of different constructions that you can use to express things like what's new and what's important. But the prosody is also relatively inflexible. So that's going to be a collaborative project with Naja Blutman-Trondhjem, who is a syntactician and a professor at the University of Copenhagen, and Elisi Matu-Sarfik, which is the University of Greenland. So we're going to collaborate on the Greenlandic part of this project and also co-supervising a master's student. And that's something I'm very much looking forward to because that's a language that is very complex in what it can do in adjusting the structure. And so it's really interesting to see whether the prosody will be as active as it is in English. And I think maybe not, but who knows. So that's something that I think hopefully we will get out very concretely, is to know more about how individual languages do things, like marking what is important, what I expect you to already know, what I expect you to add to your knowledge. Because these languages differ very much in the grammar that they have, but we really don't necessarily know the details of what can they do. And in particular, we don't know what do people actually do. When they have their choice, which one of these linguistic means will they use? In the larger picture, I'm hoping that this will tell us a little bit more about language and potentially the human mind, because I think that's one of the fascinating things about linguistics. We're communicating, right? So we have meanings and we have conventionalized ways of transmitting these meanings. That's basically what language is, right? And probably all languages can express the same things, but they do that differently. So I think it's really interesting to see what is out there. What are the things that we can use and how do we combine these different tools in different languages?
Yeah, if we're all ending up at the same place, ideally, like what are the different paths that we're getting there? Yeah, that's very fascinating.
Yeah. And also, how do you put the different things that are in your brain together, basically?
Yeah.
Right?
Like, using the information that you're getting from somebody else, how do you organize that? Yeah. Very fascinating. Thank you so much. So we'll just end on a bit of a fun question then. So there are a lot of common myths in the field and probably within your research as well. There are common misconceptions or myths. So is there anything that you'd like to clear up or debunk for our audience?
I was thinking about that. I don't know. I mean, I feel like most people never think about linguistics, so they don't have many preconceived notions that would need to be debunked. And if there are any, I'm not sure if they're super harmful. There was this thing a couple of years ago when Tumblr was still a thing. A high school student had a linguistics Tumblr, and he had this thing that was like, so, you're a linguist. How many languages do you speak? And the answer was like 5, but that's not the point. That's totally true. This is literally the dialogue I had every single time I came back to Canada before I became a permanent resident. They would always ask, what are you doing here? I live here. Also, what you do? I'm a professor. What do you teach? Linguistics. Oh, how many languages do you speak?
Right.
And then it's always like 5, but that's not the point. But, that's probably okay. But I think, it's not a bad thing if people think we speak lots of languages, and many of us speak several languages because it is helpful in doing linguistics to know more than one language.
Yeah, but just this idea that linguistics is so much more than just learning the languages. Like we're dissecting them and like learning about the innards of them more than we are the content, I suppose.
Yeah, I have this. I'm not sure if it's a good analogy or a bad analogy, but it's a little bit like if you're a gastrologist, right? You're a stomach specialist. That doesn't mean you're good at eating or digesting. It means you know how the stomach works. And it's the same thing for us. Like everybody can speak. If that was the point, then we'd be kind of pathetic. We don't speak any nicer than the rest of the population, but we're hopefully figuring out how this whole speech thing and language thing works. But it's actually quite hard. I mean, I think as a science, we're totally in our infancy. I think to some degree, because language is the object of our study, it's also a thing that we use for doing our studies, and the whole thing is in our heads, so it's legitimately very difficult. No wonder people have flown to the moon, but we really have no idea.
Yeah. I do think that talking about the research and getting it out there is a good way to get it out of our heads, though. And for the record, I do really like your analogy about the gastroenterologist, so, or however you would pronounce that. But
don't ask me.
I'm going to steal that one. I do like that a lot.
Please do, because so far, I mean, we're both linguists, so who knows? But I'm not sure. I've mostly gotten polite nods when I've tried to explain to somebody with this analogist what it means to be a linguist. I don't know.
We'll see if we can make it catch on then.
Yes.
I think that brings us to time, so
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming in today, Anja. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Linguistically Aware. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the fascinating world of linguistics. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics, please visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Until next time, keep exploring the beauty of language.